empathy in our current culture is elevated as the highest virtue. And that's what leads to all of these really destructive policies. And like you said, people who have mutilated their bodies to a point where there's really no return. It's irreversible damage. And she says that empathy can't be our highest virtue because love is our highest virtue. And Jesus told us that the greatest of these is love, to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And loving God, first of all, is calling out the things that he calls sin. And loving your neighbor is believing in and advocating for their good regardless of their feelings. Welcome back to Gen Z Unplugged, everyone. I hope you are having a wonderful day. We are thrilled to get into the topic today. We hope you've been enjoying our episodes lately with Hannah Faulkner, who's always the best to have on. She always brings so much truth and wisdom. We're just so grateful for her. And today we are talking about another great conservative woman, Allie Beth Stuckey, because she was recently written about in The Atlantic by none other than Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I remember I was online when the piece came out or when Allie put on her story that the piece came out, and just her shock at it. And she's telling her followers, like, if Hillary's like writing a hit piece on this, she's like, everyone, here's the link, you know? It's funny how, that Hillary chose Allie to kind of attack on this, and specifically her idea of toxic empathy, which she wrote a book about. And I think everyone at the office has a copy of the book. Most of us has read it. But yeah, she kind of was just attacking this whole idea of toxic empathy and kind of what Allie is all about.
Right. And we'll get into the article and kind of what Mrs. Clinton said about Allie Beth. But we had Allie Beth speak at our 2024 College Women's Summit in Nashville, and she brought her books. So attendees were able to get a copy of her book, which is great, and do a book signing. She was super gracious with that. But she also gave a really, really interesting talk all about toxic empathy and what that actually means. So to give you all some context, is Allie Beth has really championed this idea of the left manipulating our natural compassion, specifically Christian compassion, something that is a virtue and a good tendency and instinct that Christians have, and manipulating that to get them to agree with leftist policies or kind of just go along with whatever the leftist narrative is. So I think something that she makes clear that we too want to make clear is that empathy in itself is a virtue. It is something that we should seek after. It is good to be able to have the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think about people in my life who are really empathetic, and it's a great quality, but it's when you sacrifice truth, you sacrifice justice, you sacrifice goodness in order to be the most empathetic to whoever's in front of you. So I think the issue is not empathy itself. The issue is extreme empathy that leads you to a point to let someone else suffer, to give the person in front of you so much empathy that someone else is suffering in result.
Yeah, and with that sort of extreme version of empathy, she also talks about how specifically that can blind us almost, or paralyze our critical thinking as good citizens, as Americans, as women too, because we especially feel empathy. And like you said, it can blind us from seeing the other side of things. Whereas we're supposed to be in a sort of holistic standpoint, look at everything, look at all the facts, and then make an informed decision. Whereas now we're sort of in this information war, especially as of recently, where a extreme piece of news comes out or breaking news or whatever, and then everyone rushes to social media without really looking at everything entirely, and then explains everything in moral absolutes. All of these big figures on social media, they chop on and say whatever very quickly when they clearly haven't had enough time to look at the whole thing. So, and that kind of goes along with the whole idea of toxic empathy, just that blinding critical thinking and paralyzation of all that.
I think you put it really well, talking about how everything has to be in context and view everything holistically. I mean, that's what you see the issues with Christians who take verses out of context and like isolate them. And then I think that's actually a lot of what Hillary did in this article was isolating scripture without the context. And that's what happens with empathy. You isolate it so that you're just focused on one piece of the story and you forget about all of the other factors, all of the other people who are affected by it. So we will get into all of that. But to kind of give everyone an overview of what the article looks like, it is written in The Atlantic, and the title is MAGA's War on Empathy, which everything always has to be lumped in with MAGA, always. So she kind of frames it in what's going on in Minneapolis and all of the stories there. But she also talks about things like abortion, things like generally immigration, and how she believes that people like Allie Beth and quote unquote right-wing influencers like her who are villainizing empathy in light of all of these events that are happening. And specifically, she's villainizing a lot of Christian beliefs about borders, Christian beliefs about truth, Christian beliefs about marriage and tradition. And so she comes after this in a lot of ways. So Hillary Clinton points to the sermon that was given after President Trump was elected, where the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, Marianne Edgar Budd, directed her sermon at the new president, where she said, "In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now." She spoke of children of immigrant families. She spoke of young LGBTQ Americans who feared for their lives. So then she then brings in Allie Beth and quotes her response to that situation. And Allie Beth Stuckey called the sermon toxic empathy that is in complete opposition to God's word and in support of the most satanic, destructive ideas ever conjured up. And Hillary Clinton says, "Toxic empathy, what an oxymoron. I don't know if the phrase reflects moral blindness or moral bankruptcy, but either way, it's appalling."
Yeah, the funny thing about this specific instance that Hillary's bringing up, and I saw Allie's response to this actually. She's like, Allie said to her followers, she's like, she's just hoping that you don't click on the full video that I linked in X or I linked in Instagram or whatever. And the full video of that sermon is definitely it definitely invokes that response from Allie that it is, very much toxic and all these things. And it's that thing, what you were saying with missing the whole context. This is very taken out of context, very a snippet of the whole thing. So this specific instance is just, I guess, ironic in that way.
Yeah.
It's just very taken out of context.
Yeah. And Allie Beth has a really good definition of what toxic empathy really is. And she says that empathy becomes toxic when it leads you to 1, affirm sin or affirm wrongdoing, affirm evil, 2, to validate lies, and 3, to support destructive policies. So that is what the left does by framing stories so that it'll evoke the most emotional response ever. Like you brought up earlier, the situation where the 5-year-old was, arrested by ICE, when what really happened is his father was arrested to be deported, and they didn't want to leave him unaccompanied in the cold to freeze to death. So what were they supposed to do? That they were able to, they took care of him was really a good thing. But like you're saying, it just isolates that one piece and then manipulates our compassion. And you think about, oh my gosh, I'm a mother, I'm a father. Imagine if that was my kid. Or you think, what if that were me and I was arrested by ICE? And so they're twisting these things and making it so small that you aren't able to see the bigger picture. But when it comes to immigration, being empathetic for the immigrant can mean being very non-empathetic and not kind to those around him. I mean, think about Laken Riley, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Laken Riley she was a student. She was just on a regular run after class, and she was murdered basically in cold blood. And she was a nurse. She was working towards all these goals to help people. And yet there wasn't a single riot or rally. There were prayer services not held by the left, but there were some for her. But there wasn't that same level of outrage. And so when the left is wanting these emotional responses, it's very, they're trying to get you to have emotional responses in a way that's tailored to their needs. It's not overall empathy at all. And we saw that with Laken Riley and how they were very quiet on that and loud on other issues. So it's that tailoring that is the issue there.
Right. And there's been so many stories of like, especially young women, and that's who we're so passionate about helping. So it's just devastating to see so many young women who are raped, murdered by people who are here illegally. And toxic empathy always has a victim. That there is going to be young women, children, just people in general who are hurt by these things. And so Allie Beth has done a stellar job at fighting against that and fighting against the notion that we have to feel bad for people. And let that feeling lead us to keeping violent criminals here. I think it's possible to feel bad for someone, but still support policies that are best for the country as a whole. Like, I think it's possible to personally feel bad for someone who is being deported, but then also support the policy in general of securing our borders, which presidents have done throughout history. I mean, Obama had a huge deportation program. And again, it's Trump they love to come after. So this isn't something new. Like, securing our border and having a border is something that we have a right to as a country. And something that, in this specific scenario of the sermon after President Trump was elected, the bishop also brings up LGBTQ. So do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how empathy is manipulated in that sphere as well?
Yeah, I think in that specific sphere, it's very sad because these people are led to kind of reject who God created them to be. And then they are saying their feelings and all these things. And then we are being told to kind of just stand by and affirm them and be your truth, all these things. But then we're also told to stand by when it comes to the point of them manipulating their bodies in ways that are irreversible. I saw this video recently of this mother who had undergone transgender surgeries early in her life when she was trying to become a man, but then reversed and went back to her original identity, her God-given identity. And she was kind of she was in tears. She was explaining how she has this child now and she couldn't nurse him because she had cut off and mutilated healthy parts of her body, which I think also the left very much just doesn't look at those aspects of the whole. Like, I feel very like empathetic towards that woman, but they don't want you to have that empathy. They want you to have the empathy of, oh, you're rejecting those who just aren't comfortable in their own bodies and things like that. And I think, like you said in the beginning of this, they very much, or Hillary in this article very much attacked the Christian worldview, the Christian values. And she even cites things in the Bible and how Jesus would react and all these things. But I think we have to remember too, specifically, that Jesus had empathy. Obviously, he had that healthy empathy, but then he told people to go and sin no more or repent and all these things. Like, he loved them too much to let them stay where they were at. And that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, that is so perfectly said. And Allie Beth talks about this often, is that empathy in our current culture is elevated as the highest virtue. And that's what leads to all of these really destructive policies. And like you said, people who have mutilated their bodies to a point where there's really no return. It's irreversible damage. And she says that empathy can't be our highest virtue because love is our highest virtue. And Jesus told us that the greatest of these is love, to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And loving God, first of all, is calling out the things that he calls sin. And loving your neighbor is believing in and advocating for their good regardless of their feelings. That scripture has to trump what we're feeling in the moment. And I think that that is the biggest issue of the left right now, is they're so focused on right now what they can see in front of them. They aren't able to see that, oh, if we don't deport this violent criminal, another young woman could be killed. Or if we don't allow this child, or if we allow this child to, cut off healthy body parts, they are going to regret it and be miserable for the rest of their lives. All they see is, oh, this person feels this way now, let's do something about it. Or this person wants to be here now, let's let them stay. But this inability to look past the right now and the present and see the long term is pretty astounding to me, that there's no ability to do that. That it's kind of a cowardly position when you think about it, to want to just appease someone now rather than giving them the hard truth so that they will thank you later. So I think that is the short-sightedness is just such a huge problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The lack of long-term longevity for the human person and for society as a whole. They totally, I think, miss that, which I think is kind of part of this sort of extreme nature in our culture right now. Everything is just, oh, go, 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 go. Here's the news clip. Oh, it's gone the next day. Like, it's all these like high pressure, high feelings, high everything. But then it's like, oh, gone in 2 days. I think that sort of approach kind of goes into our entire worldview, especially in America, because everything is so fast, and there's headlines and there's not. And I think that whole thing is playing into that lack of seeing the longevity and the effects of all of these things that they were pushing. And kind of to bring up an idea that we talked about earlier with the whole thing of empathy or toxic empathy, seeing quickly what's in front of you, but rejecting the other side of the spectrum per se. There's Hillary brings up two specific things. She says the undocumented immigrant family and the young rape survivor, and how MAGA can't have or don't have empathy or show empathy towards those people. But Allie responded, and I think we agree with this too, how when you look at the undocumented immigrant family, you feel empathy towards them, but then if you act in a certain way, you basically reject the families that worked for years to have citizenship or to claim asylum in the right way and things like that. There are legal ways to do that. And those who do that, they work hard and they do all these things, and you reject that side of it and just be like, oh, why aren't you feeling empathy for this family? And then the same way with the young rape survivor, you can feel deep empathy for the woman who was raped. Obviously, that's a tragedy and very traumatic. But then you also reject the good of the child, and the child who basically has to receive the death penalty for a crime he or she did not commit. And it's kind of, the child is the rejection that this toxic empathy is, towards. That situation. Yeah.
And you think about, this is really relevant right now because we just had the Supreme Court oral arguments on this, but men competing in women's sports, that not only takes trophies away from women, but it also exposes women to having to share a locker room with men. And you think about our speakers, Riley Gaines, Paula Scanlon, who had to share a locker room multiple times per day with a male. And not to be gross, but a fully intact male. And I think Paula said she counted up, it was, hundreds of times totals, multiple times a day, that she was having to share a locker room with Will Thomas, who was the male athlete who claimed to be a woman and was allowed to swim on the women's team. So this isn't victimless. Showing empathy to the person in front of you, it doesn't just mean everyone else gets off scot-free. So no, there's always victims. And we talked about Laken Riley. There's also another story that came out recently just about ICE being in Minneapolis, and a nurse at a local hospital there posted a video online that said he was using, a lot of sarcasm and a lot of flowery language, but the message of what he said is, if an ICE agent comes into the hospital, hey, you nurses shouldn't help him. You should just let him bleed out. And he even described like the major artery that would be necessary to bleed out. And he said, oh, they could be gone in a couple of minutes. Ugh. So empathy for the illegal person who's come into our country goes so far that it allows other people to die in their place. Like, it's never an even exchange.
Yeah, I mean, that example, we were talking about this before recording, that shocked me. I think if more people saw that with the right mind, like videos like that, I think it would start to make some sense. I think, because I think some of these people just aren't, like we said, aren't thinking in the full holistic, looking at everything in context. But when there's specific things like that, which are coming out more and more, by the way, like the extreme reactions and things like that, we kind of saw it too when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. These videos online just showing an extreme lack of empathy and all these things. So I think if more people were to put aside emotions and just look at that for what it is and the facts of, oh, we are letting other people die because of this, I think that would put some sense into them, honestly.
Yeah. And there actually is a point of agreement here at the end, but the application of this is very different between Hillary and us. But she says, finally, I am convinced that the uniquely pernicious dynamics of social media have put all of these trends on steroids. True. Our addiction to algorithms has made society more lonely, anxious, and mean. Very true. Platforms like TikTok and, quote, Elon Musk's X reward extremism and marginalize moderation. They promote negativity and smother positivity. Empathy doesn't drive engagement, so it's not valuable. So her comments about social media are true. It has made us more mean, more cowardly, less able to just interact with people in public, and less able to understand where someone else is coming from. And it's kind of ironic because she's saying that social media is to blame for the rise of the belief in toxic empathy. You know, she would say that Allie Beth and her social media platform is to blame for that. What she would say is an issue. But where has the most violence come from over the last year? Charlie Kirk was killed by a left-wing extremist who spent a lot of time on the internet. Donald Trump was nearly assassinated twice. And we don't have specific, ties to social media, but it's fair to say that a lot of these people on the left are in these online chat rooms and they're just building each other up and they can't get out of their circles. And I think that's the biggest issue with social media is your algorithm gives you what you want to hear and what you agree with. So if you have radical extremist beliefs to begin with, it's only going to make that even worse and exacerbate the issue that you have. So I would agree with her on that, but the violence comes from the left. It's Republicans, it's conservatives who are being targeted on social media and in real life, who are actually being threatened. Their lives are being threatened and some are even being killed.
And yeah, that whole thing is ironic because the left likes to call themselves so tolerant when all these videos say otherwise and their algorithms are telling them otherwise. People are literally inciting violence. And like you said, with that nurse with the ICE agent, let them bleed out. Oh, Donald Trump deserves to die. All these things. Or Elon, rip up the Teslas, slash the tires. Like that is the opposite of tolerance and empathy. So that whole thing is very, very two-faced, I think. And yeah, missing the whole issue.
Yeah, I know. It's so ironic that she even brings this up because the actual violence is truly coming from the left. And those are the people who have actively taken action against conservatives. And obviously the, far-right extremists on that side exist. But they are villainizing our beliefs as conservatives and as Christians as extreme beliefs. When 20 years ago, honestly, we were kind of on the same page. I mean, Allie Beth in the podcast where she talks about this article, she brings up quotes from Hillary Clinton where she was pro deportation, where she had said marriage is between one man and one woman, saying it is sacred union. So these progressives and liberalism is defined by changing standards, whereas conservatism is defined by tradition and timeless values. And so they're the ones who have changed their beliefs, but they're labeling us as the extremists. We haven't shifted. They're the ones who shift over and over, year after year, more and more to the extreme side, so much so that they've villainized our beliefs as immoral. And then and actually we just read an article this morning by Mary Hassan, who is another one of our speakers, and she talks about the rising violence of women and how so many young women believed that the assassination of Donald Trump was the attempted assassination was justified, and that his murder would be justified if he were killed. So there's so much rising violence from that side because they've forgotten that we are normal. And we were just talking about this, how a lot of people that I meet, they automatically assume if you're like them, if you're nice, if you're personable, if you're a woman especially, you must be on the left because you must be sane. But then if, someone finds out I'm a conservative and they're shocked because they think, well, how could a conservative be like you because you're like me? And so that's why it's so incredibly important for us as conservatives to speak out and just say, hey, I believe in traditional marriage, or hey, I believe that babies shouldn't be murdered in the womb, to make that more mainstream so that your friends can see that you're actually just the average person.
And that's kind of what we're telling our young women too at these summits and these programs that we do, is to not be afraid and to just be courageous like Allie and like our speakers, and to not hide, because that's, I think, sometimes a tendency for especially young women in college. You want to fit in, you want to do all these things. But there comes a point where we have to show that, yeah, we are normal. And we tell our students that all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So keep being brave, keep being bold. Don't let articles like this who try to villainize you and weaponize your beliefs against you, don't let them take control of you, but to just stay strong and be courageous in your convictions. And with that, we will wrap up. But thank you all so much for listening. Please go listen to Allie Beth's podcast where she talks about this. She has a really great sense of humor about these things. And read the article for yourself. We'd encourage you to do that. And we'll also put Allie Beth's talk on toxic empathy from our Nashville College Women's Summit a couple years ago in the description. So be sure to watch that too. And of course, go buy her book because it's excellent. And that is everything. Thank you all so much for listening.